Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to our community forum session on an upcoming capital improvement project. And so for those of you that may have watched this presentation already, we did put out a video of the same presentation we will give tonight, just to give folks that were not able to join us this evening an opportunity, or sometimes I know for me, hearing something more than once is helpful. So some people may have taken advantage of watching the video prior to tonight and then hearing it a second time. So thanks for joining us this evening. So we'll get started. I'm here with Tony Sinaccio, our business official, and he'll be helping with this presentation. So as we put together our presentation for this evening, we talked a little bit about what are some questions that people might have in the community. And the first one that came to mind is this notion of building project fatigue. It's certainly no secret that in the last 6 years since I've been here, when I came, we were in the midst of a pretty large project to renovate the high school. And we've had 2 projects since that time. And I think a lot of times there can be confusion in a community. Why do we keep doing building projects? So I thought it would be important to start by addressing this. So first and foremost, when you have the number of facilities that we do, you're always looking at what needs to happen to keep those facilities maintained so that you have safe and presentable places for people to work and students to learn. And the foundation of the maintenance that you do in your facilities comes from something called a building condition survey. This is a required process that school districts have to do every 5 years. We've recently completed ours, but honestly, this is a survey that actually contains a short-term and a long-term plan, if you will, because it's really addressing all of your facilities and over time, the things that you'll need to take care of on a maintenance and replacement or upgrade schedule. So we are looking at the most critical items that need to be completed from that 5-year building condition survey. The other thing that we really started looking at 6 years ago, at the same time we were addressing this building, the high school building, was a process that would help us be fiscally responsible at the same time we addressed the issues that we were going to have going forward with our facilities. And we started employing a process called debt replacement. So basically a school district carries a variety of different debts in the form of mortgages and car payments. I usually try to use the same terminology we think of in our home. So over time, school districts borrow money, like for mortgages, to do different facilities upgrades or maintenance items. And once that debt is paid off, it gives you an opportunity to basically replace that debt and keep your debt load even, so that at least you're not creating hills and valleys on the taxation side of things. We also received an influx of federal funds with COVID. So maybe one of the bright spots of everything that we've all been through over the past couple of years is an opportunity to leverage that money on something that will be lasting, rather than something that is what we call a one-shot purchase. These are purchases that could be made that will last, well into the future and give our children something really fantastic on the facility side. We think both of these things will provide the fiscal stability that we certainly seek as an administrative team and as a Board of Education. And obviously, we're looking to always provide safe and well-kept environment for our students, staff, and community. So that's why another project. What are the components of this project? I talked before about the fact that there are critical items on our list, and they're not too exciting, but they are important. So we have a lot of roofs that are coming to the end of their useful life. Portions of all 3 buildings, which encompasses approximately 200,000 square feet, need replacing. This is a project you'll see later on that won't start for a few years. So it's important to note that it's strange to be talking about a project we won't be doing until, 2003 or 2023. But now is the time for us to do the planning for that project. And then we're also looking to address some of the issues we have with failing pavement. You might recall that back at the time we were working on the high school project, when I started here, we had some issues with that project and we had to do a little rescoping. Part of the rescoping was actually to eliminate some of the work around the high school driveways and parking lot areas. There was going to be some resurfacing done. And we really felt that, based on what our architects and engineers and landscape architects were telling us, we had some additional useful life to get out of the asphalt up in that area of the high school. We knew it was going to take a little bit of a beating during the building project, with certainly all of the trucks coming and going and so on and so forth. And so we really decided that was an item that could wait a little bit. And we had our eye, even at that time, on this particular project for doing some of that work. We also think it gives us a much greater increased capacity to create a traffic flow that is significantly safer than what we would have been able to accomplish by just doing some resurfacing. We actually, at this point, because that area has degraded enough, we can sort of wipe away the footprint to some degree, do some expanded parking near our event spaces. If you've been up here during events, especially nights where there's multiple events, you'll notice that we end up having cars parked all over. So this would give us a little bit more parking, which is significantly safer during events, especially by that end of the high school where the sports complex, the auditorium, the gym are all located. And then on the safety side, talking about making it a safer flow, if you've ever dropped off children at the high school, you know that it can feel a little frantic, a little bit like a game of chicken sometimes, as you're pulling up and trying not to pull out in front of another parent or, God forbid, a bus. And so this would separate out parent drop off and also bus traffic, student traffic and bus traffic, which is certainly an important industry safety standard that just hasn't been in existence here up at the high school building. So one of the strategies you use with building projects, probably those of you that follow building projects are no stranger to this dynamic, but usually you include at least some alternates, and alternates are identified basically as other pockets of work that a district would like to either complete now in the near future, or at least would like to know what it would cost to do that work so that they can plan for the future. With the way projects work in a school district, you have to actually put a budget to a project before it's completely designed, for one, and also you have to do it trying to think what the market will be like a year or 2 years from the time that you're designing it, which is a little bit like having a crystal ball, and that's not always a great strategy. So typically when we're building a project budget, we're being very conservative so that we're sure we don't end up in a situation, or at least as sure as we can be, to not put our community in a bad position where we oversell and underdeliver. So we'd rather undersell a little bit so that we can hopefully overdeliver. So alternates are one of the strategies where you actually say, hey, if the project budget is a little bit better than we think it will be to do this work based on the bidding climate at the time the bids are put in, then these are some things that we really need to capture if possible. So those alternates for this project are, first, we have 2 sets of windows in the DMS building that were not able to be captured in the project that we did. It was actually done during the COVID shutdown. We replaced most of the original windows in DMS and also did a complete redo of our heating system in that building, which was in desperate need. And we're thankful because we actually have ventilation that's above code, which I couldn't think of a more appropriate time when we're talking a lot about ventilation and airflow in a building. So we definitely dodged one there. So there were 2 sets of windows, one in the auditorium in that building and also the old gymnasium that are still from the 30s that we'd like to capture. We also have locker rooms in the DMS basement that are in terrible shape and in desperate need of renovation. So we're hoping to capture them. They actually were on as an alternate in the project that we're currently finishing up. And we just weren't able to capture that work. We actually didn't think we'd be able to. We didn't think we'd have the room in the budget, but we wanted to have an idea about the approximate cost of that work. And that gave us a great idea. And actually, since then, we've taken a look at some other infrastructure items and think that there's a few things we thought we would have to do to complete that we don't. So waiting has actually put us in a bit better position to do that work if we're able to this time around. The third alternate is some component of either preparing for or completing parts of some facilities for our budding agriculture program. You'll see later on an area that we've identified on campus that we think will be perfect to tuck some of those facilities centrally located so that all 3 buildings can access. We at least would like to capture the site work, which would be preparing the site to receive the facilities, including rough-ins of electrical and whatnot. But we also have plans to put a sugar shack, a sawmill, and a greenhouse, and we'll also have a crop area out there. And we're still sort of on the fence about how much our students will actually be able to engage in creating those facilities. So it may be that we'll get a price for them, but we may not want to actually do those facilities if we can engage the kids in doing the work. That's certainly an important part of their learning in the ag area. We also did a video very recently to show a little bit more about that program because it is new to the district in the last couple of years. And so I think our 2 teachers did an outstanding job of talking a little bit about their vision so that going into this project, people would have a little bit better idea when we say agriculture facilities, what they're talking about. So I think I probably covered why alternates when I talked about the alternates, but again, it's allowing the district to complete desired work if we do end up with room in the budget. And it also provides us with that accurate bid day pricing so that we have a better sense of what the work would cost, even if we can't complete it now, but to plan for the future. So earlier on, when we were talking about why another project, we were discussing fiscal responsibility. And so the timing is pretty important for this project and the vote, because we'll be paying off one of those debts that I spoke of earlier, right about the time that this project would come online. And so the timing of that is always important to keep things even and level, as I talked about. The payment that we're no longer going to be making on the debt we pay off is giving us the capacity to complete repairs, to bond that money, replacing the debt. And that also gives us a good budgetary guide to keep things even and level for our taxpayers. So in essence, we're looking to take on a payment equal to the one that we're paying off. What this does is it affords us an opportunity to have no additional local taxes. And there's some people in the past that have asked, well, really, if you pay off a project and you then add a new one, there are additional taxes. And I would say, yes, there are, certainly, because if we pay off and we don't replace, then obviously there's a lessening of taxes. But what this does is it keeps that tax levy amount that goes towards debt even. So I'll let Tony, who's our financial guru, talk a little bit more about the nitty gritty about how things will be financed. We also had a great question posted to our video on social media that I think he'll be able to weave in here nicely.
Sure. Thank you, Michelle. So the financing of this project, as Michelle had alluded earlier, we started out when we first began discussing a project, looking at roughly a $10 million project. And so, of course, as time has gone on, that was roughly 3 years ago, I think, was when we first started discussing this. The cost of construction has grown dramatically. And so we did need to increase the size of the budget to accomplish the work that we wanted to accomplish. And so in addition to this $10 million funding via debt replacement, we're also going to add to the cost of the project $7.5 million. And of the $7.5 million, $6 million will be paid for in the form of building aid from New York State. And then the difference here, $1.5 million will be paid for with reserves that the district has set aside. And so we're still maintaining that commitment to perform a project with no additional local taxes to be drawn from the taxpayers. And so we as I said a moment ago, did try to keep the budget to as little as possible, but due to the cost of construction, we had no choice but to drive that budget up. So the question that Michelle had mentioned was a great question. So a resident had asked if we were to not approve this project, then what would have happened to that payment? Well, first of all, what is the payment amount? And the payment amount is roughly $640,000. So if voters were to not approve this project, then that $640,000 payment would no longer exist on our books. What would also not exist is the building aid that New York State sends us. So we take the difference between the 640,000 and the building aid of 520,000. So what would happen to our taxes if the project weren't to go through? Our tax levy would decrease by about $120,000. And so for a $150,000 home, that's roughly a $15 decrease in their overall tax bill. There's an important but to keep in mind when we talk about what would happen to our taxes if the voters were to not approve the budget or the project. And that is that our roofs and our parking lots will eventually need to be repaired. That's inevitable that a roof will fail. And so Michelle had mentioned earlier the building conditions survey. So that's an opportunity for our architects to come into the district every 5 years and examine or assess the condition of all of our facilities, including roofs. And that information is reported to New York State. If we were to report that our roofs have, let's say, a 5-year useful life left, and our roofs were to fail, say, in 6 years, it's likely that the state would not give us building aid for the repair of those roofs because in their eyes, they would say, well, Marcellus, you're irresponsible. You should have repaired those roofs when your architect told you they were going to fail. And so we're going to elect to not give you building aid. That's just a fact of school financing. And so it's important to keep that in mind that that $120,000 reduction in taxes may not be forever if we were to not take care of our facilities the way that we should. So we don't say that as a you must vote yes for this project. That's not the point here. It's just, as I say, a fact. That's just how school finances work. So so yeah, that's essentially how the project will be funded. So thank you.
So the schedule for the project, we're referring to this as the 2023 project because that's what we hope the kickoff would be. Obviously, this is our public forum. Our vote is next week on December 7th. And if the vote is successful and our community is able to support the project, we go into project design. This can be confusing to people. Why are you designing a project after we vote on it? It's really the only way we can because we incur a cost to do project design and we don't have permission from our taxpayers to incur that cost. So we actually have to seek permission to even do a project before we incur any, at least too much cost in the design phase. So that's how school projects work. And hopefully that design phase will conclude somewhere in August of next year. And then September, we hope to have things launched to the state ed department for their review. Their timeline for review varies depending on many factors, including how many projects are in their queue at any one time. We're estimating right now, hopefully about a 3-month turnaround. I've seen that change to a 6-month or a 9-month turnaround or go down to a 2-month turnaround. So hopefully a 3-month turnaround is just about right. And then that puts a project out on the street for bid at a really good time. Usually the bidding climate in the early January or February timeframe, those are times when contractors have not really booked a lot of work yet, but they're looking to. So if you can get on the street ahead of other projects, it gives you a more competitive bidding climate. And that's held true. It's been something we've targeted on more than one occasion and had some real successful bids as a result. And then, of course, construction, we hope would kick off June of 2023 and conclude August of 2024. And we have the caveat, subject to change based on circumstances. You can see here that we're not in control over all parts of that timeline. So the parts that we are in control of, we will control. Once it gets turned over to state ed, we sort of lose control. And that's really the piece that could dramatically change the timeline in the event that things get bogged down at the state. So we wanted to provide just some images because the local community member doesn't get a chance to walk the roofs, but just to show some of the degradation and pooling that we're already seeing. So Tony talked about, the roofs could fail. The roofs are failing. We do patchwork and we will continue to do patchwork. I mean, this is a common dynamic. A lot of times when you get a leak in your home, the first thing you do isn't replace the entire roof. You try to do a patch and wait it out a little bit longer to get more life out of the roof. So we've been doing that, and the time has come, based on this timeline that we've created, that we really are going to need to do some replacement or we're going to have some significant damage inside of our buildings. And then also our driveway conditions. Again, if you drive up Mustang Hill on a regular basis and up around the loop, or if you park in the parking lots, you're already seeing the significant amount of cracking, the significant amount of pothole creation. And if you know anything about asphalt work, typically in the spring, you can see this on our roadways. Crews are out trying to put cold patch in the potholes. And by the following spring, the cold patch has disintegrated, as it does. Even if you do heat treatments to it, it still disintegrates. It'll last a little bit longer potentially. And the pothole has grown, just due to our really harsh weather conditions here. It's just a fact of life. And so what happens over time, if we are not able to get a successful vote, is that these potholes become so dramatic that they start causing damage to vehicles. And I was in a district several years ago, and the project to replace the asphalt sold itself because the potholes were so terrible. People couldn't wait to have the replacement happen. And I certainly don't want to see us get to that point again because it's quite unpleasant. And then just some pictures down in our locker rooms to give you an idea of, trying to show you things that we can show you that photograph. You can see that they're quite old, outdated, and not terribly accessible. So some work needs to happen down in that area as well. So this is a concept drawing. We asked our landscape architects to give us some conceptual drawings of what an area could look like if we separated out the traffic patterns as we talked about, and also placed the ag complex. So up where the title of this page is, that's actually sitting on top of the high school building, just to give you the juxtaposition of this particular area. So it still keeps our student parking area where it is, but it expands that area because that is a hot parking area when there's events for people to gather, especially if we're doing something in the auditorium and out on the athletic complex. And you can see that we've created a parent drop-off loop around the perimeter of that lot so that student and parent traffic in the early morning would be going into that area. Those of you that have high school students or have had know that some of our students that drive also have what we call late arrival if they have a study hall at the beginning of the day. And that actually alleviates some of the student traffic at that time. So I think it would work nicely to put parent drop off and student student parking, and parent drop off in that area. And then our bus drop off could come up the hill and have their own lane. They wouldn't be competing with all the other traffic, either coming up for parent drop off at the high school or other folks passing through the campus. Faculty parking, they could pop right into that faculty lot. You can see where that's labeled. And then coming out, they could use the drive that's on the bottom side of that parking lot that runs right by where you can see the label of the ag complex, and zip right back out the road so that there's this continuous dual loops coming in and out of the complex, but not having to do crossing. You can also see the ag complex is tucked up behind that parking lot. We had originally thought about placing it where that temporary parking lot was between KCH and the high school, although we did have a very strong desire to keep as much of that green space as possible for kids to play outside. If there's one thing we've learned during COVID, it's the importance of getting everybody outside. And it's one of those things when I think about what would I like to keep from this time, and one of those things is getting kids outside as much as possible. So it allows that space to be open for either community athletic use and also for just for play and recess. And then tucks our ag complex in a place that actually gets a lot better sunlight than that particular area, which is quite desirable when you're putting a greenhouse and a crop field. So you can see a sugar shack, at least outlines, sugar shack, a sawmill, a greenhouse, and then a field outline for some crop fields. There's also some natural barrier there. That's not to say that our facilities will not be pleasant to look at, but there are times when you're gardening that things don't look as beautiful as they might. And we have such a beautiful campus that we wanted to make sure that we provided an area that, did have some just natural camouflage for the things that are less visually appealing, and then keep that green space looking beautiful. So we think it's a win-win all the way around. So at least we're hoping to get infrastructure in there. Those of you that spend a lot of time driving up by the high school, there is a utility shack that sits in the parking lot, that staff parking lot. Currently, it's a green and red building, I think gray and red building that sits there. That will have to be relocated as well, but it actually will fit in nicely with drawing utilities into the ag complex. So that should all work together nicely. So Tony talked a little bit before about what happens if the vote is not favorable, at least from the fiscal side. Like, what impact does that really have on your taxes? And he also did mention, if the project doesn't go forward on the timeline that we've set out, your issues just become larger and more expensive. I mean, we all have had roofs that we've had to replace. The situation that happens when your roof starts to fail. It doesn't get cheaper and it doesn't get easier. And that's just a fact of life. It's not me being dramatic. It's just a fact of life. The same thing can be said of asphalt. There's no point at which the asphalt will magically start to repair itself. It's just going to degrade. So we've tried to pick a window where we've used up as much of the useful life as possible while not putting ourselves in a position where we're completely chasing leaks and potholes. So in the event that the community was not able to approve this particular project, the district and the board would work together to make a determination about how to proceed. And there's options. One of those options is put it back up as is and try to do a better job of helping the community understand that these are not glamorous items, they're necessary items, and we do really need the support, and hopefully we'll be able to help people understand if they didn't initially. Another way to approach it, if we find out there's something in the project that's egregious to folks, I'm not sure what that would be here, but there could be something, we could repackage slightly, maybe making the project more palatable to the voter. As Tony said, the funds, the capital reserve part of this is a savings account. So the money has been designated to do projects with. That's why it's there, to cover the local share. that capital reserve sits there until we do a project, and then we leverage it, as Tony explained previously in his finance explanation. And then, of course, our debt would be paid off and there wouldn't be a replacement for it. So if you have $150,000 home assessed value, you'd save about $15. If you have a $300,000 home assessed value, you'd save about $30, at least temporarily, until eventually this has to be addressed. So the vote is next week, noon to 9. Most of you are well aware of where and how we vote. It'll be in our auditorium. Absentee ballots, if they're needed, I would say the timeline is tight at this point, but you can call us tomorrow and we will do everything we can to get one in your hands. And to vote, you need to be 18 years old and have to have been a resident of the district for at least 30 days prior to the vote date. And I think we've covered everything. So we're happy to take any questions you might have. Mike?
So could you go back to the funding slide, maybe the fourth or fifth one? Okay, so under total cost, it says $7,500,000 via use of capital reserves. And then underneath that, $1,500,000 paid for with capital reserves. How much is paid for with capital reserves? 7.5 million or 1.5 million?
1.5 is coming out of the savings account, but that allows us to have an additional amount of 7,500,000 because we're going to be reimbursed 6 million of that from the state. So the actual drawdown from the savings account is 1.5 million. This could have basically what I think Tony wanted to show. I shouldn't say what Tony wanted to show. Tony can say what Tony wanted to show.
Yeah, I think to your point, Mike, a better label might be $7.5 million via use of capital reserves and building aid from New York State.
Right, that makes sense.
Yep.
And then the two bullets underneath that would address each of those.
Correct.
Capital reserves and state aid.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
I would have said that, Tony, if I had said what you thought.
We are like brother and sister up
Yes,
here.
we are.
Other question,
Sure.
just to confirm, Tony and I talked a little bit about this. Can you go to that conceptual drawing?
Sure. I have a feeling, no. There it is.
So the roadway or the driveway on the bottom of that conceptual drawing, closest to the ag complex, that currently does not exist up there, right? And that would be added.
Correct. Yeah, so this parking lot, if you think of it this way, ends with this last row of spaces. So this would be adding a drive.
So it's making it more of a loop.
Yes.
Than there currently exists.
Right, so the bus drop off here. They actually will loop out Learner's Landing probably more often than not. Some of the smaller buses could loop back here. We told the landscape architect to make sure that turn radiuses were checked in each one of these areas during actual design, because obviously the turn radius of our older buses is a larger turn radius than newer buses. And so we'll usually, during a design phase, when you're trying to determine turn radius, we'll take the oldest bus and practice to see. So this could be a loop for buses to go back out, but right now they likely would go down and drop off in front of the middle school and continue out Learner's Landing. Folks coming up though could come up and go out here, so they're not crossing over here. And this row of parking, we're still on the fence about whether or not to keep those spaces in. Certainly our thought right now is that during the morning drop off, these would be coned so that no one's parked there. So it's very safe for students exiting the bus. but this makes a great visitor parking area, which we currently don't have. So that folks can just pop right into the high school office if they need something. So we're thinking we'll keep this, but cone it in the morning, very similar to what we have at KCH right now. There's visitor spots, they cone in the morning and then they open them up during the day. Mike, sure.
Staying with this drawing, I think I'm reading or visualizing this correctly. In the student parking where the parent drop off is, if you were to continue following that, is that an exit through like a clump of trees right there? Is that how that exits out? Right?
It exits right here.
Okay, right.
Yeah. Whether or not these are really trees, they're conceptual trees right now, but I doubt, depending on the height of the trees, we'd be putting them exactly how they are because you wouldn't be able to see anything, but they look cute on the concept drawing. Probably not in real life though.
And that entrance to that student parking would be further down Mustang Hill than it currently is.
Correct. I feel like it's right about here now where the exit is.
Okay.
Although I'm not the most spatially adept person. I'm looking for Ryan's nod of his head. Yeah.
The parking that's on the far east side would be right across the metro.
Yeah.
So
That's what I'm thinking.
so the entrance would not be all the way down to the access road to the bus garage, but somewhere in between there.
As you come up that hill, there's an actual spot where it flattens out, so without much grading change, you would just turn off into that extended line.
Here's that, Mike. You can just see where my cursor is, the shadow of that access road.
Yeah, okay.
You can see the hillside here.
I think that conceptual drawing has about 100 parking spots too, and at the last homecoming game, we had 81 cars parked on the grass. And that meant they were using all the parking spaces by the tennis courts, all the parking spaces on the south side of the building where we are now. The entire faculty lot was full. And KCH is parking in front of their building was partially full too. You have 81 cars running on the grass.
Yeah, I think it's might even be slightly more, but it's close to 100. A lot of it depends on, we were on the fence about this row, whether it's more than 100 or less than 100, but I'm thinking we're gonna keep it, cone it, and then use it for visitor parking. I just think it makes sense. Cal?
Michelle, what year was the most recent 5-year building survey report?
It was just done.
It was just done.
Just
Okay.
done, yep. Yes, the state puts us on a schedule. So we do it when they tell us. And they actually, did they delay us 1 year as they were redesigning their schedule? Or was it right at the 5-year? I feel like it was 6
We were
years.
right at the 5-year, so that, yeah, so we completed our last precisely 5 years after the one prior.
Okay.
Yeah, that's right, because it was just completed when I started. And I'm in my 6th year and we just completed it last year. So that makes sense. All right. Hearing no other questions. Kate, do you have a question?
Well,
Hi, Kate.
Yeah, it was more of an observation, as I was coming out of the concert the other night. Is something going to be, are the steps being considered as part of this project, coming in and out of railing?
They currently are not, but I know what you're talking about because they need some work. So noted, duly noted.
And in fact, the way this, and this is just a conceptual drawing, so this is by no way the final version. But one of the items that we were discussing now 7 years ago, when we were looking at that larger high school renovation project that failed the first time, looks like we are going to install a sidewalk leading from those stairs that you're talking about, Kate,
Yes.
all the way over to the athletic complex. So you no need to walk through the parking lot anymore to
Yeah,
get
that
over
is
there.
safe, right?
What's Yes.
but those steps are
Would
degrading.
be part, would be,
Yeah.
so those steps would be right in that same area. So yes, I think that would be an easy thing to do.
Okay, nice. And is there lighting associated with this as well?
There is lighting associated. Obviously, this isn't, and it's always funny when we're talking about projects because at this phase, it isn't designed. You know, nothing's designed. But there is lighting, you know, they did plans for lighting, but for me to tell you where it's going to be or any of the particulars, it would be difficult. Just like Tony said, you know, we're going to try to do this, but how much of it's going to be captured, you know, will happen more in that design phase. But it's good that you brought up the stairs because I noticed them too and worry. You know, there's no shortage of, I mean, there's things you can find everywhere. And even though we have an amazing buildings and grounds crew, it's never ending. I mean, it's just like in your house times a million. Just never ending.
Nobody watching remotely who had any comments or thoughts.
Okay. Well, Tony and I will certainly hang around, but for those of you that have had your questions answered, we greatly appreciate your presence here this evening, and we hope to see you next week for the vote.